Hey there, folks. Welcome back to our cozy corner of creepy tales, perfect for a late-night shiver with a warm blanket and a mug of tea. I'm so glad to have you all here, especially my seasoned friends who love a good scare that lingers. Tonight, I've got a story that'll crawl under your skin and stay there, one that feels like it was ripped from the shadows of real life. It's a tale from a small-town hospital, passed down by someone who lived through it, and I'm gonna spin it for you just as it was told to me. So, settle in, turn down the lights, and let's dive into something downright chilling. It was the winter of '79, deep in the heart of Maine, where the snow piled high and the wind howled like a banshee outside St. Joseph's Hospital in a little town called Derryfield. The kind of place where folks leave their doors unlocked and the hospital's the only building open past 9 p.m. Ellen Carter was 23, fresh out of nursing school, her white uniform still creased from the iron. She'd just started her first job at St. Joseph's, and let me tell you, she was equal parts thrilled and terrified. Barely a month into the gig, she was still learning the ropes, her hands shaky when she took a pulse, her heart racing every time a doctor barked an order. But she was determined to prove herself, even if the night shifts left her jumpy as a rabbit. Night shifts in a hospital ain't for the faint of heart. The halls go quiet, the fluorescent lights buzz like angry bees, and every squeak of a shoe sounds like something you don't want to meet in the dark. But that night, January 3rd, things were calm. It was around 11 p.m., and Ellen was in the nurse's station with two older gals, Marge and Dolores, sipping coffee that tasted like motor oil. The Christmas decorations were still up, tinsel sparkling in the lobby, casting red and green flickers on the scuffed linoleum. Patients were settled, vitals checked, meds handed out. It was one of those rare moments where you could catch your breath and pretend the world was normal. Then the phone rang, sharp and shrill, slicing through the quiet like a knife. Ellen jumped, splashing coffee on her clipboard. Marge answered, her face hardening as she listened. "Trauma coming in," she said, hanging up. "Bad one. Prep Bay 2. Ellen's stomach twisted. She'd handled broken bones, heart attacks, even a kid who swallowed a marble, but bad one from Marge meant something else. Something ugly. Minutes later, the ER doors slammed open, and a gurney came rattling in, pushed by two paramedics with faces like stone. On it was a man, or what was left of him. The sight hit Ellen like a freight train. He'd been drinking, they said, lost in a New Year's binge, drowning his demons in cheap whiskey. Decided to end it all with a shotgun. The blast had torn through his face, obliterating his lower jaw, his right eye, and half his cheek. What remained was a horror show, shredded skin blackened by powder burns, bone fragments glinting in the fluorescent light, and blood pulsing out in thick, rhythmic spurts. His face wasn't a face anymore, just a gaping, raw wound that seemed to pulse with a life of its own. Ellen's knees buckled, but she caught herself on the counter. She'd never seen anything so wrong, so utterly broken. The paramedics rattled off vitals, their voices clipped. Male, mid-30s, blood pressure crashing, pulse erratic. Ellen's eyes were glued to the man, who, against all odds, was still alive. His chest heaved, his one remaining eye wild and rolling, like a trapped animal staring into the void. Blood bubbled from where his mouth should have been, and a low, wet gurgle escaped his throat. Dr. Hargrove, a grizzled veteran with a permanent scowl, took one look and shook his head. "No surgery. He's too drunk. Blood alcohol's off the charts. Stabilize and pray." Ellen didn't get it. Stabilize? How do you stabilize a man who looks like he's already halfway to hell? They wheeled him into Bay 2, and Ellen was assigned to assist. Her hands shook as she grabbed gauze, saline, sutures, anything to keep moving. The man's tongue, without a jaw to anchor it, kept slipping back, blocking his airway. Dr. Hargrove barked orders, and they ended up stitching the tongue to his upper lip, the needle pulling through swollen, torn flesh. The man's gurgled moans filled the room, a sound Ellen would hear in her nightmares for years. They cleaned the wounds as best they could, packing them with gauze and wrapping his head in bandages until he looked like something out of a horror flick, blood seeping through faster than they could replace it. Then, it got worse. The man started moving. Not just twitching, but thrashing, his hands clawing at the bandages with a strength that didn't seem human. He tore them off, fingernails digging into the ruins of his face, ripping at exposed muscle and bone. Blood sprayed, splattering Ellen's uniform, warm and sticky on her arms. She screamed, stumbling back, while Marge and Dolores shouted for restraints. "He's out of his mind!" Marge yelled. "Shock, booze, something else." They pinned his arms, tying them to the gurney with leather straps, but his body kept jerking, like something inside was fighting to get out. Ellen's vision blurred with tears, but she forced herself to stay upright. She was a nurse. She had to be strong. Dr. Hargrove ordered morphine, a heavy dose to knock him out. The man's thrashing slowed, his body going limp as the drug flooded his system. His one eye fluttered shut, and the room fell silent except for the drip of blood hitting the floor, steady as a metronome. They rebandaged him, and Ellen was told to stay with him in a private room, to monitor his vitals. Just her. Alone. With that thing on the bed. The room was small, cold, with a single flickering light that buzzed like it was mocking her. The man lay hooked to and fore, his chest rising and falling in shallow, uneven breaths. Ellen sat in a hard plastic chair, her clipboard forgotten in her lap. Every time the light flickered, she swore she saw his eye open, staring at her through the blood-soaked bandages. But when she checked, it was closed. Her heart pounded so loud she thought it'd wake him. The air felt thick, heavy, like it was pressing down on her chest. She kept telling herself he was just a patient, just a man, but nothing about him felt human anymore. The room seemed to shrink, the walls closing in, and the smell of blood and antiseptic made her gag. She lost track of time, minutes blending into hours, but at some point, she noticed his breathing had stopped. She checked the monitor. Flatline. Her training kicked in, and she started CPR, pressing on his chest, feeling the give of broken ribs under her hands. But it was no use. He was gone. She called the code, and Marge and Dolores came, but there was nothing left to do. Dr. Hargrove signed the chart, muttering about how it was a miracle he'd lasted that long. Ellen stood there, numb, her hands still trembling from the compressions, her uniform stiff with dried blood. Then came the worst part. As the newest nurse, it was her job to take the body to the morgue. Down in the basement. At 3 a.m. Marge clapped her on the shoulder, saying, "You'll be fine, kid," but her eyes said she knew better. Nobody offered to go with her. Ellen wanted to argue, to beg, but she swallowed her fear and nodded. She had to prove she could handle it. The morgue was in the oldest part of the hospital, a labyrinth of concrete corridors that hadn't been touched since the place was built in the 20s. Ellen pushed the gurney, the wheels squeaking, the sound echoing off the damp walls. The lights were dim, some burned out, casting long shadows that seemed to writhe in the corners. The body was covered with a sheet, but Ellen could still see the shape of it, the unnatural angles where a face should have been. She tried to focus on her footsteps, but every few seconds, she'd hear something else. A shuffle. A faint scrape. Just the building, she told herself. Old pipes. Rats, maybe. But her skin prickled, and her breath came in shallow gasps. The corridor stretched on, the morgue door always just out of reach. She passed a flickering exit sign, its red glow making the sheet look like it was soaked in fresh blood. Her hands gripped the gurney tighter, her knuckles white. She didn't want to look at the body, but her eyes kept darting to it. The sheet had slipped, just a little, exposing a sliver of bandage, dark and wet. And then she heard it. A sound like a sigh, soft and wet, coming from under the sheet. Her heart stopped. She froze, staring at the gurney, waiting for it to happen again. Nothing. Just silence. She told herself it was her imagination, that she was exhausted, terrified, seeing things. But when she started pushing again, her hands shook so bad the gurney wobbled. Halfway down the hall, she heard it again. Clearer this time, like a breath, ragged and deliberate. Her blood ran cold. She stopped, her eyes locked on the sheet. It hadn't moved, but she swore the bandages had shifted, like someone had tugged at them. "You're tired," she whispered to herself, her voice trembling. "You're just scared." But the air felt different now, heavier, like something was standing just behind her. She spun around, expecting to see someone, something, but the corridor was empty. Just shadows and silence. She pushed faster, the squeak of the wheels louder now, almost frantic. The morgue door loomed ahead, a heavy steel slab with a chipped handle. She reached for it, her hand shaking, and that's when she heard it again. Not a sigh this time, but a word. Low, garbled, like it was spoken through a mouth that wasn't there. Ellen. Her name. Her legs nearly gave out. She didn't look at the gurney, didn't dare. She yanked the door open, the cold air of the morgue hitting her like a slap. Inside was a tiled room, sterile and freezing, with metal drawers lining the walls. Her breath fogged as she wheeled the gurney in, her eyes darting to the sheet. It was still, but she didn't trust it. She had to move the body, had to put it in a drawer. That was the job. Her fingers brushed the sheet, and she flinched, expecting it to be wet, but it was dry. Just her mind playing tricks. She pulled the sheet back, and her breath caught. The bandages were loose, unraveling, like someone had been clawing at them again. She didn't look at the face, couldn't. She grabbed the body under the arms, dragging it onto the drawer's metal tray. It was heavier than it should have been, like it was resisting. She shoved it in, slammed the drawer shut, and backed away, her chest heaving. The elevator ride back to the ER felt like a lifetime, every creak of the cables making her jump. She didn't tell anyone what she'd heard, what she'd felt. They wouldn't believe her, and she wasn't sure she believed it herself. But she never forgot it. Ellen worked at St. Joseph's for years, saw car wrecks, overdoses, heart attacks, but nothing ever matched that night. She got married, had 2 boys, moved to Portland, but even now, at 68, she wakes up some nights, drenched in sweat, her mind back in that basement. She hears the squeak of the gurney, the sigh from under the sheet, her name whispered in a voice that shouldn't exist. And sometimes, when she's alone, she feels it. A presence, watching, waiting, with one wild, rolling eye. Well, folks, that's the tale, and I hope it gave you the goosebumps you came for. Thanks for sticking with me through this one, you brave souls. If it sent a chill down your spine, hit that subscribe button and ring the bell so you don't miss the next creepy story. Stay safe, sleep with one eye open, and maybe double check the locks tonight. See you next time.